This show is intended for general purposes only, as individual situations may vary. Statements made should not be relied upon as recommendations or solicitation. When discussed, past performance is no guarantee or indication of future results. Nelson Financial Planning offers securities through Nelson Ivest Brokerage Services, member FINRA, and SIPC.
Good Sunday morning. This is Bud Hettinger. Next on News Radio 102.5 WFLA, the longest-running radio show in Central Florida, Dollars and Cents, with my good friend Joel Garris from Nelson Financial Planning. You can call him at the office this week at 407-629-6477 to schedule your free consultation to discuss your retirement plans. Or you can talk to him right now at 407-916-5400.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program Dollars and Cents. My name is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. You're listening to Dollars and Cents here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. Also simulcasting to our friends on the AM dial on 540 AM. Here's what we got going on in the program today. We're going to talk about some steps to get you ready for retirement. It was an article that we posted on the various social media channels this past week, and we thought it had some good information in it, so we will talk about that. Also, recap the week that was, as we typically do on the program. As you might well imagine, there were plenty of headlines, plenty of tweets to talk about, and we certainly will do that on the program. But to get us all started, I thought we would spend some time this morning talking about income, and particularly income in retirement, and to give you some background on one of the biggest rules of thumb out there in the industry that you hear a lot about. And that is this 4% rule. And the 4% rule basically goes something like this. 4% is the withdrawal rate that you can reasonably use when you are calculating how much income you can get out of your assets to generate income during retirement. Probably one of the most widely used rules of thumb out there, particularly when it comes to specifically retirement income planning. And the rule's been around a long time. It actually was introduced in 1994 by a now retired financial planner by the name of William Bengen. I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but he wrote an article, did a study, and determined that 4% of a portfolio that was half in stocks, half in bonds. Remember that piece right there, okay? We're going to circle back to that. So half in stocks, half in bonds, and adjusting that 4% by inflation each year. So year one, it's a 4% withdrawal. Year two, it's 4% plus inflation, which would make it a 4.03 roughly. I think I did. No, 4.12 roughly, 3% of 4%, 4.12% the next year, and then the year after that it goes to 4.24, and you get the drift, right? So it adds inflation in, and it was adjusted at. He did his research looking at various 30-year increments going back to 1929 and determined that the 4% was a sustainable withdrawal rate for a portfolio, half in stocks and half in bonds, with the withdrawal adjusted by inflation. Interestingly, 20 years after that, or roughly about a dozen years ago, he actually adjusted that rule, his 4% rule, to be 4.5% based upon some additional research that he did, incorporating a little bit more smaller stocks into the portfolio. So that's the background, if you will, on one of the most widely used rules of thumb out there when it comes to retirement income planning. It's a rule that if you're talking to anybody about, well, how much income can I get, which goes hand in hand with the question of, am I ready to retire, or how much do I need to retire? All of those questions that have anything to do with retirement really do go back to this sort of a rule of thumb. So this is probably one of the most widely used rules of thumb out there. It's one that we use in the office when we're just doing some rough estimates. And it is important to sort of know the background on it. Now, where we are a little different than the 4% rule is that generally for those rough calculations, I usually will run at a little bit higher than that. And oftentimes I might use 5, probably topping out at 6. That really depends upon age. That depends upon whether you're worried about kids, or if you've got kids, or if you want to leave it for the next generation. Those types of things sort of go into sort of which rate you use. My rule of thumb generally is around 5%. The reason that is my rule of thumb is at the office on a regular basis, and you know this if you're a client of the firm, we do a lot of what is called behavioral coaching. And basically that's a fancy term for managing your emotions, okay? And so we do that by having not just a series of speaker events during the course of the year, but we also are pretty good at communicating to our clients on a regular basis, particularly if the headlines warrant. So often you'll get a personal email from me every few weeks, and it may be accelerated if there is some headline that is commanding a lot of attention. So, but usually, you know, those come out every 6 to 8 weeks, and because of the behavioral coaching, we're just a little bit more comfortable at a 5% rate because our traditional allocation is not 50-50. I think a 50% stock, 50% bond portfolio is a bit too conservative for the retiree, because when you look at a married couple, age 65, retiring today, the odds are nearly 100% that one of them will still be on this good earth at age 85. So it's really much more of a 20 or 30 or sometimes even longer proposition that the money has to do what it needs to do. So I don't like the notion of at 65 still having a 20 or 30 year time horizon. And that's one of those other sort of misconceptions out there. Everybody thinks that retirement is sort of the end date for having any potential growth on your investments. It's absolutely not, particularly if you're planning to hang around this good earth. And on average, you're going to hang around 20, 25, 30 years. Guess what? You probably want to have some growth on it. So we're not particularly big fans of that 50-50 allocation simply because it's too conservative. It gets too high on the bond side much too earlier. Where we counterbalance that is by using predominantly large blue chip dividend paying types of companies through the actively managed funds that we utilize on a daily basis with our clients. So what that means is that there's a little bit more flexibility in the withdrawal rate. But with that type of allocation, I think it's important to emphasize that you want to be flexible across the board, because retirement is going to be different from one year to the next. Most people don't realize that in the first few years of retirement, that's actually where they're going to spend more money than in the latter years of retirement. Everybody sort of gets hung up on those medical costs that you may very well incur in the last few years of life, and that's certainly a big number. But if you look at the overall trend, you will find that expenses and money spent is typically higher in those first 5 or 10 years of retirement rather than the last 5 or 10 years of retirement. And when you stop and think about it, it sort of makes sense, because in the first 5 or 10 years of retirement, well, you're younger and you're able to do stuff and you've got some free time. And what happens when you have free time? Well, you go and do stuff, and that means that generally is going to cost money. And in contrast to when you were working, you didn't have that much free time because you were working. And when you were working, you were generating income. So now that you're retired, you got free time, you go and do stuff, whether it's playing golf or whatever the case, traveling or whatever the case may be, you need money to do that. So it really does require some flexibility when you're looking at those overall income in retirement, but particularly when you're looking at the sort of the general rules of thumb for determining how much retirement income I can get in retirement. And I think the traditional 4% rule, which was subsequently adjusted to 4.5%, if you look at the underlying allocation that determines that, the 50% stock, the 50% bond, I think that's a bit more of a conservative allocation. If you shift that allocation to maybe 70-30 or even 75-25, then I think you can look at a little bit better withdrawal rate overall that ultimately is a bit more reflective of longevity and the cost of things and how you spend money in retirement. One of the most important concepts when you're thinking about retirement income and retiring and planning for that is that you really do want to make sure that you're looking at it from a very flexible type of lens. I often describe it in the office as, let's say you were working, and let's say that all of a sudden you became worried about your job. Would you spend money the same way? The same thing works when you are retired, right? You're not working and generating income, but the money that you've saved all of your life is now doing that same function. So what that means is that you've got to have some flexibility when that money hits those periods of time where there is some volatility in the market, and consequently to be able to adjust, much like you would if you were still working and were concerned about the longevity of your job, to be able to have that flexibility in retirement. I think that's one of the most important things that you can have as you enter into retirement, is know that the more flexible you are, the easier and the better path it will be in retirement. So certainly something to think about. We thought it was interesting to give some historical perspective on that 4% rule and where that comes from and how that has changed over time and what the fundamental underlying assumption is behind it. 50% stock, 50% bond, that's the underlying assumption behind it. So what happens when you shift that, then you might be able to get a little bit better rate of withdrawal. So Certainly some things to think about. We will slide to the break. When we get back from the break, we'll recap this past week here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. You're listening to News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Well, welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. You're listening to Dollars and Cents here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. Before the break, we were given a little bit of a background on that 4% rule that you hear often as a rule of thumb for retirement income planning. The individual who introduced that rule back in 1994 actually adjusted it about 20 years after to about 4.5. The issue that we have with the rule is it assumes a 50-50 allocation stock bond, which in our view is a bit more heavy on the bond side than it really should be, considering things like inflation and taxes and longevity. But it does still provide a good rule of thumb. We typically run it at about 5% just for conversation purposes, because our investment approach is a little bit different than the rest of the financial world, because the rest of the financial world relies very heavily on the bond side, and we just think that does not work out too well over time. So certainly a little bit of background on that rule. In the past week, it was, well, it's always never short of headlines, even in a week like this past week, where it was a short week because Monday was Memorial Day, and so the markets only had 4 days to react to the headlines, and certainly there were plenty of headlines because you had the back and forth on the summit with North Korea, and particularly it was like deja vu all over again as Europe made some headlines, much like it did 3, 4, 5 years ago. It seemed like every time the summer kind of turned around, when everybody was, vacationing in Europe because school had let out and summer had started, Europe was making headlines. And then last year before, that sort of subsided. Well, Europe reared its head again this past week, particularly in Italy, where a government was sort of formed. It's kind of one of those things where they got so many political parties in these European countries that they always kind of have to act by coalition or act by, kind of whoever you can pull together. But the group that is sort of been pulled together to be the ruling group politically in Italy is a bit of anti-Euro, and so consequently there was some market reaction this past week as that was making the headlines. Stay tuned on that. Europe certainly as a whole is doing better economically, and even the pigs, which were the Portugals, the Irelands, the Italys, the Greece and Spain that were getting all the headlines 3 years or so ago. Those are certainly better economically. All of those countries are, but they still have relatively high unemployment and certainly still have a number of economic issues in the form of government obligations and payouts that will continue to be a bit of a drag on the economies of those countries for some time to come. So that obviously was a headline that generated some reaction in the market, but the offset of that, because basically for the week the market was relatively flat, not really up, down maybe a little bit. I think the Dow for the week was down around 100 points, which is barely a movement. The week ended with some pretty impressive economic data out of this country, specifically in the form of the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate dipping down to, excuse me, 3.8%, which in fact is the lowest since April of 2000, and in fact, it ties the April 2000 mark. The last time the unemployment rate was lower than that 3.8% was 1969. That's almost 50 years ago. So some interesting perspective on the unemployment rate and the dramatic decrease of the level that it is at. The wage gains actually started to show in some lower paying fields such as hospitality, and clearly that is reflecting a ongoing sort of tightening market across the spectrum. So across the workforce spectrum. So very low unemployment rates, and obviously the market responded quite positively to that on Friday, which sort of offset the reaction to the Italy story as well. As we look ahead to this coming week, it is a full week in the market, and obviously we're getting closer to the expected June 12th summit date with North Korea. But on Friday of this week, which is June 8th, the G7 summit starts in Canada. Stay tuned for conversations about trade and trade wars and those kinds of things that I suspect will be a major part of the conversation up there, and also up there because the G7 summit is actually occurring in Canada this year. Also, the UK is in the middle of trying to figure out its Brexit deal, and so that's also going to generate some headlines. So as we look ahead, those will be the headlines to kind of continue to watch across the board. So G7 summit coming up on Friday, and then some various economic reports during the week. Not a terribly exciting week economically, simply because it's not the end of a quarter or not the beginning of the quarter. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. So we will continue to keep you informed on all of that stuff as the week progresses. Thinking a little bit more about what we were talking about in the last segment about retirement income and some of the general rules. It's interesting how perception differs from reality when it comes to retirement, and ultimately how the numbers play out for retirement. A recent survey by the Employee Benefit Research Institute looking at retirement confidence when you poll the people that are still working, only 36% of them anticipate that their monthly Social Security benefit will be a major source of income in retirement. If you then poll the people that are actually retired, 67% determined that their monthly Social Security benefit is, in fact, a major source of income during retirement. I guess the message there in those statistics are if you have not yet retired, when you start to run the numbers and look at your overall retirement picture, it is certainly important to get accurate information on Social Security and what those benefits will be for you when that time comes. The single best place to go for that is Social Security itself. Most people are a little bit reluctant to do that, but Social Security is, in fact, quite helpful when you are having conversations. They and they alone can generate the most accurate projections on what your Social Security is going to be, because after all, they're the ones that have the data. So make sure that as you are preparing and ramping up for retirement, that you have that conversation with Social Security to generate out the statements and the reports so that you can look at all of the options. Because even though while you are working, as this survey says, even though while you are working, you don't think it's going to be a major part of your retirement, the reality is that when you get to retirement, it will, in fact, be a major part of your retirement. So make sure that you know what those numbers are. Pay particular attention to the reports, the annual reports that you get, as well from Social Security. So certainly some things to think about. We will slide to the break. When we get back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the steps that you can get ready to retire, courtesy of an article that we posted on our social media channels this past week. An interesting article that caught our eye. We thought we would spend some time talking about it here on the radio program Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris, News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris, Nelson Financial Planning. In that last segment, we were talking about the markets and kind of recapping. I mentioned the Dow. For the week, it was down about 100 points, which is pretty insignificant. Interestingly, the broader base market was actually positive by about 0.5%, mainly as a result of the unemployment data that came out on Friday that really went a long ways towards offsetting the Italy news earlier in the week. Last week, we did post an article that we came across from AARP that's entitled The 10 Steps to Get You Ready for Retirement. We thought it would make for interesting conversation here on the radio program. Of course, at any time, if you would like to engage or join in on the conversation, you are, of course, welcome to give us a call. The numbers to call on in and join the program, 407-916-5400, toll free 1-855-545-1025. Often I get off on my monologue and don't give out the numbers, so I've been told that I need to do that more. So 407-916-5400, toll free 855-545-1025. They also have a text feature, which is 23680, which is text. And then if you want to send us a good old-fashioned email, which, funny to describe email as good old-fashioned, but in today's world, there is a group of people under 30 that don't appreciate the qualities of an email, and they certainly don't appreciate the qualities of a phone call. But the email address, Joel, Joel, at NelsonFinancialPlanning.com. So that's Joel at NelsonFinancialPlanning.com. So this article that we'll chat about, if you look for us on any of the social media stuff, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and those kinds of places, you will see a copy of this article as well. It certainly did have some good suggestions. So we thought we would cover some of those. One of the suggestions is that to really kind of define what retirement looks like, and that looks differently for everybody, really. If that involves, I want to spend more time with some hobbies. What are those hobbies? And at the end of the day, because we're talking about retirement, important to know what the expense of those hobbies are. Obviously, a hobby involving gardening might not be as expensive as a hobby involving piloting an airplane. There's a bit of a difference in the price point on that. Similarly, travel. What does that look like? Are we talking traveling internationally every quarter, or are we talking about going over to New Smyrna Beach or similar place? So, or is it working with the grandkids and spending more time with them, or is it volunteering for a cause? All of those things are things that make up what that retirement will be. So it's really important, and this is one of the first questions we always ask people is, what do you, and it's generally phrased as, what do you plan on doing with all this free time? But that's really the heart of that question, is to get a handle on what exactly retirement will look like, and more importantly, what does the related cost of that come down to? Because obviously traveling over to New Smyrna is a bit cheaper than traveling to China, for example. So it's important as you start this preparation for retirement, the better handle you can get on what that sort of looks like, the better off or the more accurate a projection for retirement you're going to have. So really look at what that looks like and try and be as specific as possible in terms of what retirement is going to look like. And then from there, you certainly want to then do, kind of the nuts and bolts, right? I mean, take stock of what you own and what you owe, and the income that's going to come in and the income that's going to go out. And obviously looking at the overall asset picture really allows you to focus on how much or from the asset picture, then you can use one of those rules of thumb that we were talking about earlier in the program, which is that 4 or 5% rule of thumb. And then that allows you to ultimately determine sort of what the income looks like that you're going to be able to draw off of your assets. So once you have an idea as to what retirement looks like, and that's very different for every person, then you want to do sort of an inventory, if you will, of those assets and what you own, specifically also taking into account what you owe. So is there a mortgage on the house? Is there credit card debt or the things like that outstanding that you're going to want to address prior to moving into retirement? Because the lower you can keep those expenses that are fixed, that are going out to pay for things, the more that's going to give you the opportunity to spend money on a variable basis, so that, and obviously on a variable basis, that's sort of where the fun is, right? So certainly some things to think about there. Excuse me. One of the most important issues is evaluating your health, because obviously health and health costs are going to be a major part of retirement. So you really do want to enter into retirement in as good a shape as possible, because those costs aren't getting cheaper. And so consequently, as those costs continue to rise, they become a larger portion of you. They're going to consume a larger portion of your retirement income. So double check the health, not just the health of your assets and financial picture, but also the health of you personally, because in order to be able to enjoy retirement, you want to be in as good a health as possible. And with that sort of goes the notion of, if you're just sitting around doing nothing in retirement, then that's not very healthy either. So make sure you've got some kind of an activity that you're able to engage in to keep you mentally sharp and aware. Certainly those are some important things to think about as you're starting to take stock of retirement. We've got a bunch more that we will cover in detail as well. but we will slide to the break. We get back from the break, we will continue the conversation about things to do as you get ready for retirement here on the show, Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning, and you're listening to News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. On the program in this segment, we're talking about some steps to take before you retire, some things to certainly think about. Chief among them, what does retirement look like? I don't think many people think a whole lot about what it looks like. They have a tendency to focus on, man, I just want to be done working. I don't want to have to go into the office. But the reality is that you really do want to spend some time thinking through what exactly retirement looks like, because there's different ways to travel, there's different places to travel, there's different hobbies, there is many different aspects of what retirement looks like that ultimately you want to have a little bit of a clear picture on so that you can best quantify exactly what the needs are going to be in terms of income during retirement, because then that will really segue directly into taking an inventory list of what you own, your assets that are going to ultimately be responsible for generating out income in retirement. And the easy rule there is the 4%. We like to think of it as 5%. Rule for determining your income that you would generally get off of the assets that you had during the course of your retirement, and really looking at what you own. And, of course, you also have to look at what you owe. Hopefully the debt is very well under control, because obviously that's the best scenario as you enter into retirement. And if it's not, then perhaps you want to figure out a way to make sure that it is all cleared up before you get to retirement. And then, of course, taking a look at your health, because that becomes a major consideration in retirement, and make sure that you are able to stay healthy and in the best possible health shape, because I'm guessing in retirement you just don't want to be going and visiting the doctor's office all the time. You probably want to be going and doing something differently than that. All of that ties very well into looking at Social Security. The statistic we shared earlier, where only about a third of current workers think that Social Security will be a major source of income during retirement. Meanwhile, if you talk to retirees, nearly 70% of retirees consider Social Security a major source of income. So it's important to know and to understand how much to expect from Social Security and when to collect it. And we could do a whole radio show on that topic. You hear a lot of conversation about running calculators, running estimates. How do you maximize the benefit? Be careful about those types of analysis, because they look at maximizing out the benefit in absolute terms, meaning that if you live to 90 but waited until to collect Social Security until 70, in absolute magnitude of dollars, you would be collecting more rather than if you had collected it at 62 and then proceeded to live to 90. You don't need a fancy computer program or 20-page report to tell you that. That should be self-evident. But what that doesn't take into account is the time value of those dollars, and it certainly does not take into account the person that may be interested in retiring before age 70. So be careful on those calculators that say, oh, you should always wait. Sure. Okay. We understand that the pure math exercise says, well, you recoup the most amount of money by waiting as long as possible to collect it. Of course, the recouping the money proposition requires you to live to 90 in order to be able to do it. So that may be one of the biggest reasons why you say, well, maybe I'm not going to go down that path of delaying this for the maximum period of time. There are some cases where we would say, yeah, you probably want to delay it. Those would be cases where perhaps the assets that you've saved for retirement are not as great in size as what you need in order to support your lifestyle. In those cases, you would say, well, why don't I wait on Social Security to try and at least maximize that out because simply did not save enough along the way to cover my retirement in the form and fashion that I view my retirement on. The article that we posted to social media also has a variety of other types of suggestions or thoughts in that, so we encourage you to check that out. Another couple more, creating a retirement budget, that obviously makes sense. Looking at your expenses, figuring out which ones you may want to not have as much or which ones you may want to have more of. It kind of works both ways, that is for sure, when you're thinking about planning for retirement. And then also looking at, to the extent that you want to be actively involved, you want to be actively doing something. Does that include work? And if so, how much is the compensation or the money that you would be making from that work? So again, a long list of things to consider, but that's certainly the case, and certainly things that you want to consider before you retire, because once you retire, going back to the job you just had is sometimes a bit of a difficult proposition. So certainly want to be thinking about all of these things before you get to retirement, and ultimately determining and thinking about what retirement looks like and what that overall retirement picture looks like. So some interesting things. It's an article entitled 10 Steps to Get You Ready for Retirement, and it comes to us courtesy of AARP.org. And that article, as we said, is available on our social media outlets. Also on those various social media places like a YouTube, like a like Google Music, and of course Facebook and Twitter and SoundCloud and all of them. We do post the radio show to those various networks as well. So if you would like to listen to the show or you missed any part of it, know that we wind up posting it within 24 hours of the live program here today. So be sure and check that out on the various social media channels. So anyway, we will wrap it up for this week. Thank you all for listening, and we certainly appreciate that. And check us out on the social medias and networks as well under Nelson Financial Planning. Have a great rest of Sunday. Looks like it's going to be a hot one out there. You've been listening to Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning on News Radio 102.5 WFLA. How have your investments performed over the past 5 years? Do you know? Are you happy with that number? At Nelson Financial Planning, we've been achieving investment results over the past 30 years using actively managed investments that we own personally. This is Joel Garris, and I invite you to review your investment results with us. Visit NelsonFinancialPlanning.com or call us today at 407-629-6477 to set up a conversation to review your investment performance. That's NelsonFinancialPlanning.com or 407-629-6477 to set up that conversation.
A+ Better Business Bureau accredited. Nelson Financial Planning offers securities through Nelson Ivest Brokerage Services. Member SIPC at FINRA. Listen to Joel Garris on Dollars and Cents every Sunday at 9 a.m. on News Radio 1025 WFLA. This show is intended for general purposes only, as individual situations may vary. Statements made should not be relied upon as recommendations or solicitation. When discussed, past performance is no guarantee or indication of future results. Nelson Financial Planning offers securities through Nelson Ivest Brokerage Services, member FINRA, and SIPC.